This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources. Consistent with its Running Right process, Alpha is an energy company committed to being a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward. We fuel progress around the world. More information at alphanr.com.
The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
It's amazing what my students with special needs can accomplish. Their pride is priceless. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and welcome back to Jeff Shapiro, Richmond Times-Dispatch, reporter here at Capitol Square and correspondent through all kinds of media, from Twitter to the work that you do with the Community Idea Station. I think every Friday, I think that you got a report.
Just a clerk typist.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Right. We'll let our viewers know, Jeff, that we're having the conversation on December 17th. They'll be seeing the program a little bit later this month. And what's particular about the 17th is that we had an opportunity for the governor to present his budget, a little less than £4 budget, to the joint money committees. So I would suggest in the topics that we might cover this time to start with some comments about the budget and reflecting on how it in the past, and then budget proposed.
Well, keeping in mind that budgets are always works in progress.
Yes.
The governor will propose. That the governor proposes in December is a somewhat new twist. Back during the Wilder administration, the legislature, because of its difficult relations with Governor Wilder, pushed through a bill that would force the governor, Wilder in particular, but governors in general, to introduce their spending plans about a month before the legislature actually convenes. This has changed sort of the dynamics of budget politics. Governors tend to, and Governor McAuliffe is no different, use the run-up to that mid-December rollout as an opportunity to talk about all sorts of priorities. In other words, why wait to get one bite of the apple when
Yes,
a governor can get 5, 6, or 7, and Governor McAuliffe has been no different. What distinguishes the McAuliffe budget at this point in his administration is that this is what I think of as his legacy budget. This is the budget that a governor introduces at midterm. It's the budget over which he has the greatest influence because it represents the governor's priorities as opposed to, say, priorities that he may have inherited from his predecessor. And of course, this budget will be in place beyond the close of Terry McAuliffe's term in January 2018. So his successor, to some degree, will be stuck with what has been introduced, accepted, rejected, massaged. Now, what makes the McAuliffe budget at midterm so interesting is that this is a Democratic governor who continues to have a very contentious relationship with a freshly affirmed Republican majority. This governor made a determined effort to tip the Senate to a Democratic majority. He was not successful. The legislature remains the last redoubt of Republican power. There are no Republicans in statewide office in Virginia. So it is at the legislative level that Republicans are in a position to use their greatest influence or achieve their greatest influence. And of course, for the third year, as with the second and first year of the McAuliffe administration, there's going to be a fight over a Medicaid-financed expansion of Obamacare. Republicans are dead set against it. The Democrats are all for it. At this point, it seems not as much an exercise in policy as one in politics. The bases of the respective parties expect their politicians to strike a certain stance on this issue. And McAuliffe is happy to oblige Democrats, and Republicans in the legislature are happy to accommodate the grassroots of their party.
You know, after the governor must have spoken for a half hour or so, and starting with education, and we can come back and talk about that some, he did then save to the last what you've just been talking about.
My English in-laws would say, saving it for best.
Yes, yes.
But what is, I think, extra important about the Medicaid gambit year 3 is that this is being folded into the budget itself. It is part of the budget's fabric. It assumes that a certain amount of money will be saved by Richmond availing itself of $2 billion or more of Washington's largesse. And that money, or the savings that allegedly is generated through the acceptance of those funds, is paying for things that the governor believes are of great value to Republicans. That includes a corporate tax break that he proposed, but Republicans fancy themselves great anti-tax hawks. There's also money in there for some programs that are of a particular interest to particular Republican legislators. So, for example, the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation, which is that state agency that promotes Virginia's colonial past, a great an interest of Tommy Normant, the Republican majority leader in the Senate and soon to be co-chairman of the Senate Finance Committee.
Now, everyone knows who's watching this program, I'm sure they do, that the Senate did remain 21 Republicans, 19 Democrats. Fewer Republicans among the 21 that might go for the plan that would draw down some Medicaid money. But among those still there who has spoken very openly that he thinks it's time to do something is one of the new co-chairs of finance. And so it will be most interesting to see how the Senate's version of the budget plays out.
And you speak of Emmett Hanger,
Yes.
who is a Mountain Valley Republican. He's from Augusta County. It is in the Mountain Valley section of Virginia that great moderate Republican tradition, progressive tradition, really was born, and whence sprang moderate Republicans such as Linwood Holt and John Dalton, Emmett Hanger. I think Senator Hanger would make it very clear that he's not at all confident, despite his commitment to Medicaid expansion, that there's a lot that can be accomplished given the current lineup. that maybe some things can be, the term he used with me once was around the edges, but that it would probably be in the next governorship that there might be greater opportunities. But there are many wild cards I think, in the senator's suggestion, and that includes that maybe the Democrats would start eroding the Republican majority in the House, and maybe the Democrats would even have an opportunity to narrow further this closely divided Senate. But it's an issue on which the parties sharply disagree, and I would suggest that these sharp disagreements are aggravated by some personal distastes that legislative leaders have for the governor, and to some degree the governor has for them.
There was an interesting sentence that I'll reread it sometime after the governor made his pitch to adopt the Hospital Association's plan, to the effect that if you don't agree with this, we have many other things that we can agree on, which I wouldn't suggest that was offering up front an olive branch, but it was an interesting recognition.
Well, keeping in mind that this 2-year budget is a behemoth. It's $110 billion. Now, substantial numbers of those dollars are so-called special funds, that they are taxes that pay for specific services or programs and can't be diverted elsewhere. Some of it is money that is passed on to Virginia through the federal government, but is passed on through the state budget. That said, these dollars are fungible. They are subject to negotiation, and I think what the governor is saying is, there's a lot of gruel in this trough. Maybe we can, feed together on some of it.
Going back to the beginning part of the governor's presentation, and he, I think, indicated that his major push was education. As he referenced many different matters that would add, I believe, $1 billion to education.
And that's
over
K
the 2
through
years.
12, and then also higher education.
Right. Were there any parts of that in education that kind of stood out? Of course, some of this has been kind of leaked out, as you said, in previous days.
It was not leaked out. It was
Set out.
It was announced
Yes.
with a certain amount of stagecraft.
Right.
The governor is talking about $1 billion or so in additional education aid. There is also a very substantial bond package, $2.4 billion, nearly $2.5 billion, principal beneficiaries of which are the colleges and universities. But while it is the holiday season, and this is Santa-like, would seem to be Santa-like largesse, when it comes principally to elementary, middle, and upper schools, secondary schools, a lot of what the governor wants to spend is intended to begin filling a hole that was created in the K through 12 budget during the recession. The legislature's investigative arm, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, has said that overall there's been about a 7% contraction in public education spending. And again, we're talking about K through 12, largely because of the very steep downturn. One of the consequences of that has been a sharp, some would say, sharp reduction in public school employment, about 5,000 fewer staff members. Well, what McAuliffe is trying to do, as I said, is begin filling that hole and resume, or to staff up anew. This is not a problem that can be addressed, I would think, fully in this budget, but it certainly is a problem that the governor, for which the governor is proposing some significant steps. And perhaps in his farewell budget, he will try to continue the momentum, I think the word is that he would likely use. But again, remember, the legislature has to go through this budget too.
Would you think that there would be bipartisan support on the education portion of the budget, assuming that there's money there if the legislature cuts out some of the revenue?
Education funding is probably a fairly easy issue on which both parties can come together. Keeping in mind that the a good chunk of the Republican majority is from rural Virginia, which relies heavily on Richmond's beneficence. So one would think that this would not be a difficult sell for the governor with rural Republican legislators, keeping in mind that the countryside has access to the trough of tax dollars that the wealthier suburbs have. The other feature of this initiative is doing something about these troubled urban schools. This is something that the governor and Ann Holton, the education secretary, have discussed at great length. And I think that would make this package similarly attractive to urban Democrats.
It would appear to me, interesting your take, one of the biggest challenges that will take place as the legislature works on the budget. One, agreeing with what you're saying, that they want to do more on education, is determining just how much of the revenue is coming from Medicaid. Mm-hmm. And so they cut that out, and then what else gets cut out then on the spending side would be, because they may like all of the governor's spending for the most part, but not like all of his revenue coming in, particularly with that Medicaid money.
And this creates something of an operational difficulty for the House and Senate budget committees as they go through their work. They're going to have to fly-spec the budget and find out, where these dollars are being saved or generated that can be traced back to the Medicaid money from Washington that the governor hopes that the state will take. That will be offset, I think, some of that anxiety could be offset, I think, by this continuing emphasis on economic development and jobs. One of the features of this budget is a somewhat stable source of federal dollars for at least 2 years. That
Right.
Virginia will not have to go through another round of these automatic, across-the-board spending cuts, the fancy word for which is sequestration. But one of the things that the governor has emphasized, and I think the Republicans agree on this, is that sequestration is by no means a thing of the past, that this could very well be a problem for Virginia when the next president is elected and the new Congress is installed, assuming there's a continuing division in the federal government as well. But what all of this does is call attention to a kind of nagging feature of Virginia's economy, and that is the perhaps overdependence on federal largesse, depending on how one calculates this. Roughly a quarter of the gross state product can be attributed to federal spending, military and civilian, and indirect federal spending through contracts and that sort of thing. If Virginia were just a business, I don't know that its proprietor would be comfortable knowing that roughly a quarter of its accounts receivable are are with, you know, a single customer.
Right.
So part of this emphasis, some of it, a good deal of it rhetorical, on economic development is to somehow wean Virginia off of its dependence on Washington dollars.
Jeff, while this will certainly take up most of the air during the session, there will be other issues. And before our time would all expire, what are you seeing as some of the other hot issues that the legislature is going to be dealing with in 16?
Well, you know, you'd think that after an election that having been refreshed, as the late Hunter Andrews would put it, that they may be less inclined to hit the hot button, but it does not seem to be the case. I mean, just ahead of the governor's budget report, a state senator from Southwest Virginia indicated that he would be introducing legislation to reintroduce these vanity tags that feature the stars and bars, the Confederate battle flag logo of the Sons of the Confederacy. The governor, using his executive power, did away with that, following a Supreme Court decision over a similar series of tags in the state of Texas. Gun rights will likely be an issue again. They always are. But this time, the governor, using his executive power, has said that weapons are off limits or are prohibited in state office buildings. But, you know, don't forget that, you know, ours is a government with a legislative branch and a judicial branch, and the head of the legislative branch said, well, the governor's order doesn't apply to the buildings that are controlled by the legislature. That would include the Capitol and the General Assembly building. So there's going to be a lot of talk about firearms rights too. And then I confess that we in the press are attracted to such things, and these issues will get lots of coverage. Also, the public workforce is in for a bit of a pay raise. I don't know that that's anything that the legislature will resist, but a feature of public employee compensation, that is retirement benefits. Speaker Howell wants to continue a study of ways that essentially end this traditionally paternal form of pensions, moving away from a retirement that is largely funded by the state in behalf of an employee, and put the onus on the employee for him or her to essentially manage his or her retirement.
And among other issues that you're seeing, matters pertaining to, I think being referred to as religious freedom, that have come up in other states.
Well, you know, one of the issues, and this is tied into the whole issue of same-sex marriage, that now that it is the law of the land, that somehow religious institutions will be forced to sanction such unions. I seem to recall there is a separation of church and state.
Right.
It's been affirmed many times.
Yes.
But I'm not going to fault the Republicans for pushing this. This is something that social, cultural, and religious conservatives active in the Republican coalition would expect.
Immigration?
Yes, immigration. When I last checked, Virginia's border with Syria was the responsibility of the federal government. This has not stopped, however, Republican legislators, largely sensitive to some of this horrific terror-related bloodshed in this country and elsewhere, to closing Virginia's borders to Syrian refugees. Again, this is something that Mr. Madison, in putting together the Constitution, decided should be the prerogative entirely of the federal government. That's not stopping legislators, many of them with fresh immigrant roots, including Manolo Lapasi, a delegate from from Richmond from pushing this bill that, again, I think the Republican base expects, even though it is of questionable legality and in all likelihood is going nowhere.
Jeff, we appreciate your being on This Week in Richmond. Encourage our viewers to follow you and all the media that they can, and we will stay tuned to see what happens in 2016.
Thank you. Have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources, a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward.
The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.